Welcome to Balev, at the Heart, where we get to the heart of the Word of God.
Welcome to my series on Gender Matters Part 4. The first 3 videos in my series closely followed my Doctor of Ministry dissertation project, but beginning with this section, we'll veer off of that project and continue with our trajectory through the Bible. In this and in future videos of this series, we'll be following the thread of God's intentions for women from chapter to chapter, book to book through the Bible. How has God designed us? And what roles does God expect us to fill? In this part 4 of my Gender Matters series, we see the beginning of polygamy. Does the Bible condone polygamy? Or does the Bible simply tell it like it is? Let's review what we've seen so far in parts 1, 2, and 3, and in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. In Genesis chapter 1, we saw that God created humankind in His image, male and female. God created male and female for joint rulership over the earth and for joint relationship with Him and with one another. In Genesis chapter 2, we see that God created Adam, the first human, from the dust of the earth, the Adamah. And from Adam's rib, God created Eve, the Isha from the Ish. Adam recognizes that Eve is bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, and God ordains marriage as a uniting of male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and they will become one flesh. In Genesis 2, we see diversity within unity. Things change in Genesis 3. Eve and then Adam disobey God's command, and they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Evil enters the world. The results of their sin cause Adam to become subject to that from which he was made, the earth, and Eve to be subject from that from which she was made, the man. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. At this point, rulership, relationship, and unity all suffer the consequences. Nothing is as God originally created it to be. However, He also promises a solution. The seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. That promise, we know, is later fulfilled in Yeshua, but we're not there yet. We pick up the thread of the story of women and their status in the Bible and in the post-Edenic world with Genesis chapter 4. And here we see one of the first fruits of the results of sin, how Eve's sin and its consequences affect women in the post-Edenic world. Genesis chapter 4, verse 19. Now Lamech, Cain's grandson, took for himself 2 wives. This is the first recorded occurrence of polygamy in the Bible. Does God condone polygamy? Or does the Bible just tell it like it is? Does the Bible simply record history in this instance without passing judgment? Lamech is the grandson of Cain. Cain, if you recall, murdered his brother Abel because God preferred Abel's offerings, the firstborn of his flocks and the fat portions, to his own offerings, the fruit of the ground. Before Cain acts on his murderous feelings, Adonai speaks to him. He says, "Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, it will lift, but if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the doorway. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." In the last video, we discussed the striking linguistic parallels in Hebrew between this verse and Genesis 3:16. In chapter 3, the woman's desire is for the man, but he will rule over her. And in chapter 4, sin's desire is for the man, but he must rule over it. The linguistic link between these 2 verses cannot be ignored. We know that Cain did not master his urge to murder his brother. 3 generations later, his grandson Lamech also kills a man, and Lamech tells his tale to his 2 wives. There is a linguistic connection between Genesis 3:16 and Genesis 4:7, and there is a link between Cain and his grandson murdering another human. Could we draw a connection between the devaluing of another's life that leads to murder and a man marrying more than one wife at a time, thus devaluing the ontological equality of women? The polygamous male, Lamech, is a vengeful, murderous man of a murderous line, the line of Cain. J.K. McKee, in his book, Men and Women in the Body of Messiah, Answering Crucial Questions, notes that in certain movements, cults, there is a sub-movement of men who favor polygamy and see its presence in the Bible as a condoning of this practice. Yet he rightly describes Lamech as boastful and vengeful, a braggart who considered himself as greater than Cain, a man whose descendant, Tubal-Cain, forged bronze and iron, perhaps as weapons of war. And McKee says, quote, Lamech was a figure associated with violence who should not be emulated, having set his lot with Cain, end quote. And in the Jerusalem Talmud, Yevamot 653, Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi said, it is written, quote, between their rows they make oil, they do not turn to the way of vineyards, that their copulation was not for children. Rabbi Simon said, it is written, they ate and were not satiated, they whored and did not spread, that their copulation was not for children. It is written, Lamech took for himself 2 wives, Ada, who was beautifying her body, and Zillah, who was sitting in the shadow of children. Now, this describes a marital relationship or relations which are centered on the needs and desires of the male, not of unity between male and female. In this Talmudic passage, Lamech is not described as having oneness or unity with either of his wives. Rather, he uses one to satisfy his desires and he uses the other one to procreate. Now, the biblical account differs slightly in that both women are recorded as having children, but the Talmudic description does center Lamech's focus on himself, with others in his periphery present for his use. Polygamy devalues and objectifies women, and here in the first biblically recorded case of polygamy, he is associated with a murderer. This is the result of Eve's sin coming to fruition. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. In this passage, and in others that we'll get to in future videos, God's words are not explicitly recorded in the Bible as saying, hey guys, this is wrong. This is an example of what not to do. The biblical accounts simply record what happened. This brings us to the question of whether the Bible is descriptive or prescriptive, meaning, does it simply record what happened, or does it tell us how to live and how not to live? We know, of course, that it does both. Some passages are halakha, and some are agadah. Passages that are halakha tell us how to live, what to do and what not to do. Passages that are agadah tell us the stories we need to know, our history. We know and pass on the agadah. We walk in the way of halakha. Here's an analogy. I am crossing a stream. In order to avoid getting my feet wet, I will cross the stream by stepping on rocks, stepping stones. These stones are the halakha, the way for me to walk. I step only on these stones. This is like walking according to God's commandments, and dry feet is like doing mitzvot and avoiding sin. What is streaming past the rocks is the agadah. History is being made and is flowing past me like water every day, past my point of walking, but I do not walk in its way. I stay on the stepping stones. I walk in the halakha and observe my history with the agadah. Polygamy is in our biblical history, but it is not the halakha. It is part of our agadah, part of what the Bible records as our history. The Bible tells it like it is. God does use people and families who've been subject to polygamous relationships, as he uses everyone he calls. But, as we'll see, God also gives us halakha on the matter. After Yeshua comes and begins to reverse the curses, we see in 1 Timothy 3 that God expects male leaders to be, quote, husbands of one wife, end quote. God does not condone polygamy. In future videos, as we work our way through the Bible, we'll see the damage that polygamy does to families. Join us next time for Gender Matters Part 5.